The lighting at a rock concert helps to create atmosphere and can be used to direct the audience's attention to certain performers or parts of the stage. Touring bands will often use their own specially designed lighting systems, but when starting out in a band or as a solo artist, you may need to hire a small lighting system from a local concert production company. In this video, titled Unit 17.1, it's real hot up there, we'll find out how to set up and operate small lighting systems for your first live shows. You should have the basic music industry skills Unit 17.1 video worksheets in front of you and be ready to answer questions about the equipment and procedures which you'll be shown.
We're just here today to talk roughly about and mostly about rock and roll lighting. So being rock and roll, I guess the first thing we should talk about is a basic parcan, which is probably something that most people, if you've been to see a live band in a pub or a small venue, the first thing you will see is the parcan. It's used a lot and mostly in lighting because it's a fairly, as far as price, it's inexpensive to buy or hire, and it gives a good wide throw of light if it's the wide angle version of the parcan. 1000 watts, a lot of punch. All it is basically is a lamp, as you can probably see there. We can open that up later for you, with a lead coming out the back. Now this can get a little confusing for some people. I'll just grab a lead here to explain it. You have to run two of these together. This can actually be a little bit confusing. What we'll do is we'll put one down here, just very basically. We'll grab another one. A normal power point that you'll find at home on the wall that you'll normally run a kettle out of will run 240 volts, 240 volts. These particular parcans actually run 110, so you've got to run two together because your normal power source from a wall gives you 240, but these run on 110 each. So that's 110 volts. So what we actually do is plug two together, which I'm now doing here. And these are a special lead. They call these Y splitters in the industry, so that's a term you'll often hear. And by putting them together, you then plug that in and away both of them go. So two of them have to be plugged in together in order to work. What we're going to do here is just actually pull apart a parcan so you can have a look how it is assembled. First, you've just got the backing to it. It's as simple as that. The lead comes in through the back of the can, two wires coming to the lamp base there. Let's pull that off there. It's a 2-pin lamp. You've just got one of these spring-loaded rings here. Just by squeezing that, out it comes. There's really nothing complicated to it. The next thing you've got here is the lamp source itself. We pull that out. Now if you look at it, it basically looks like a car headlight. It has a bit of a rippled lens, and what this gives you is a wide throw of light, and that, as I said before, is exactly why we like to use these in rock and roll. When it's time to colour the band in a yellow or a red, by using a few of these on a stage, you're giving a wide throw of light, and if the light's coloured, you've got a wide throw of colour. And of course here's the actual can itself, which is as simple as that. There's nothing more to explain. It's just a barrel which controls the light in some way, and at the front of the light is a gel frame. Now all the gel frame is for, if I pull that out, is for holding the colour. Pop him down there. Sheets of gel, you'll hear them called gel in the industry, that's what they're referring to, is basically coloured, I suppose, paper, clear paper, and any colour can be used. There's a wide array of colours available, but in rock and roll, or in most shows, you'll find that most of the combination will be maybe a green, red, blue, and an amber or a yellow. I'll just hold those up so you can see those. All they are is coloured sheets of paper. With the colour frame, all it's a matter of doing is slipping it into the front of the light, like this. And there you have it, a can ready to use light. Amazing. Okay, the next thing to show you, which is also a parcan as we were looking at before, this is a PAR 56. The other one you were looking at was a PAR 64. This is the second most commonly used lamp in rock and roll, or even theatre for that matter, in some ways. The only difference with this one to the other one is the fact that this one does run on 240 volts. So one of these can run on its own in a normal GPO, general purpose outlet, just a power point's what I'm trying to say. And these here are 300 watts. So the PAR 64s are 1000 watts, and these are 300 watts. The advantage being you can run more of these because you're using less wattage, which means it doesn't want as much power. So you can use a lot more of these, which means if you're limited in power, which we all are in this industry when you go to small venues, unfortunately, you can use a lot more of these, have a show that looks fuller with lighting, but in fact you're not drawing as much power. Handy little light to have. Par 56. Okay, the next thing we'll talk about, which isn't used as much in rock and roll as par cans, but it is used quite a bit to create a bit of a theatrical feel, I guess, or to give a softer throw of light, is Fresnels. Fairly easy to explain. We've got here 3 different sizes. Now, one thing with lighting, you'll often find the lights will all look bigger or smaller than each other, but they all have the same function. It's a bit like a Mini Minor, a Commodore and a truck. They all do the same thing, they're just larger. So, to explain what a Fresnel is, it has this lens here, which is a rippled lens. The same as the par can, you'll notice the lens had ripples or bubbles in it. It gives a throw of light. So rather than having a clear bit of glass, this has a Fresnel lens. So you'll hear that term, it is called a Fresnel, or as often the units will say, this one's a Prelude, which is the make, the same as Commodore is by Holden, and it's the F, which stands for Fresnel or Fresnel. These are the 2 words you'll hear. And all they are is just to offer a bit of light. This one here, 650 watts. This one here, a Cantata F, which you might see out there in the industry, is 1,200 or 1,200 watts. And the Cadenza, once again a Fresnel, they all are exactly the same. If I turn them up, once again the same lens. This bit of wire here just for safety, in case something goes wrong. You don't want bits of glass flying out over your artists, so that's just to hold that there. 1,200 watts, that one there, and the Cadenza, which is 2K or 2,000 watts. You'll often hear people say 2K, they're meaning 2,000 watts. It's just a short way of expressing it. Okay, the other things which are important and if not essential to all your lighting are 2 of these little things called a safety chain and a hook clamp. Now it doesn't matter what they're on. In this point in case we're using a Fresnel, but on all of your par cans, on all of lighting in general, you'll have a hook clamp. That is called a hook clamp. As you can see, it's a hook. And the way they work is naturally they go onto the poles. We'll just use this as a bit of a demonstration. The other thing which is essential in lighting is a safety chain, which I'll now show you. Now, in this instance, we're showing you on a Cantata F, but it's regardless of what light you're using, you have to have a safety chain for safety, naturally. And all it's a matter of doing, when the light is suspended on your lighting pole or rig or whatever you hang it from, you must suspend the entire light from a safety chain by just securing it. Like I said, if it's on a roof that you're hanging the light off, hang it off the nearest pole. But there's just got to be basically a chain between the light and the pole so that if that hook clamp breaks or the light gets bumped, the light can fall and naturally lock off on the chain. So it's just safety, but safety is of course the most important thing. No job's worth dying for, especially not lighting. Okay, the next thing we'll talk about is a profile spot. Now these are used for specials. You'll hear people call them specials, which means if something happens in the part of the show or the theatre stage act that is special, that's the way they got the word, they'll often want a special spot on it, which means a single spot coming from above or from the side. The way they achieve this is with what we call profiles. Now there's all different brands and sizes. Once again, I've just laid a few out there so you can see, regardless of how big they are, they all do the same job and their purpose is the same. So this one here is a 650 watt, the same as the smaller version of the Fresnel. This one is 1,200 watts or 1,200, and this one here is a 2K or 2,000 watts. Now, one way I'll just show you how they work, basically, is they have a lamp, as all lights will have, we'll hope, a lamp source, and there is the reflector. You'll notice in the par can, the lamp and the reflector were one. It's one unit complete, the same as like your car headlights. These actually have a lamp, and when that slots in, if I tilt that back, you'll see that's the reflector in there that you're seeing on your camera now, which actually reflects the light down the profile. Once it goes down the profile, I'll just show you in the 2K, it's a bit easier to see than what it is in those. The light source, this is set up exactly the same as you just saw. When it comes down, these are lenses. You've got one lens at the back. If I move the slide, you have another one at the front. And this is how you get to focus the light. So you've got your lamp, your reflector, and 2 lenses, and by moving those back and forth with adjustments, in this particular unit here, with those two knobs, you can focus the lenses back and forth. And the same with all the other units. There's the focus knobs there for the lenses, and simply by unscrewing and moving them back and forth, I can actually show you this happen just to make it a bit easier to understand. By moving those back and forth, as you can see, that lens is moving. And that's how you get a focus. And when I say a focus, by increasing or decreasing the size of that special spot, which all come from the profile. And what we'll do now is we'll just do a basic setup to run through a bit of a setup with you. Naturally, you need stands to put most of your lights on if you haven't got a rig that's in the venue you're working at. So we've just got some stands here, so we'll just set these up. There's many stands you can use for setups, but naturally this is only one of them. Fairly simple, just lock it off with a tri-nut, and all of them, once again for safety, have this ring, which is just a second lock, so that if this one was to fail, naturally that ring would stop it. All stands you come across will vary in some way, but nothing major. Okay, next one we'll do, this is a T-piece. We just whacked it in the top there. And then we get a short length of pole here by unscrewing these nuts here, and sliding it on through, and locking that in. We'll just do the same over here. Screw it there, put a stand down. Lock it all off, same again. So you saw how I did this before. You can have these at any height. We'll make this one shorter just to be different. And of course, depending on the stand you're using, depending on the height you can get to with your stands. Okay, so we've got our stand set up. Stand being here. This is a T-piece, as you may have seen, and I'll just show you again to reinforce it. They call it a T-piece simply because it is a T-piece. It's not a piece of tea, so don't put it with your coffee. Lock it in there with a bit of scaff pole. So here we have a par 56. We'll just put this onto the pole, put that on there. When you're hanging lights, it's an idea to actually lock them on as soon as you put them on, just for safety once again. Hang them up. First thing, of course, your safety chain. Over the top of the pole like that. As I explained before, if anything happens with a hook clamp, you've got the safety chain. So we'll do the same again. We're just going to set up two lights on each bar, this being the bar, of course. As we do that, whack our safety chain on. There we go, nice and safe. Before we go any further, I'll just show you. These are the par 56s, so remember these run a normal, what I'll call like extension lead plug, for the want of better words, so it's 240 volt. We've got a power lead here, so I'll just plug that in for you. Just like a normal extension lead. Plug her in, and as you can see, the light's coming on. Same again, we'll plug the next one in. These are the par 56s, which as I said before, draw 300 watts. So there's those two lights there. Because they're only 300 watts, and these power leads are coming out of a normal power point that you would find at home, and they're running 2,400 watts. Naturally, we've got ample power to run many of these. So what you can do, which is why these plugs here, if you look on the back, you have your pins on the front, and on the back, you have another set of pin holes there. These are called piggyback plugs, for the reason that you can actually piggyback them, which just means plug them in together, like so, then plug those in, and they'll both come on. Just like that. So that's piggybacking, which means in some rock and roll shows, because you've got a big stage area, you'll need more than a few lights to cover the whole thing with a colour or light. You put two together, and by spreading those out, you can cover a wider area with two lights. So there you have it. Okay, we'll just set up a basic lighting show here with a 4-pack, which is the lighting desk we're going to use for this. It's called a 4-pack because it has 4 channels. Okay, I'll explain all the functions on this in a moment. First, we've got our lights up here that we've set up already, and we've got a lead coming from, in this case, we're going to call this number 1. You've got to label your units. in your head for rock and roll most of the time, just to know we're going to call this number 1, number 2, and naturally number 3 and number 4. Okay? This power lead is coming from number 1, so we just plug this into the back of the 4-pack here. So it says here, number 1, so that's where we'll put that. Now, you don't, I hope I don't confuse you when I say this, but you don't always have to plug light number 1 into channel number 1, but in this case I will. We can explain why a little bit later. So I'll just keep doing this. We'll just plug in all these single leads from each of these lights. Light number 2 we'll put into number 2. As simple as that. I'm saying simple, but of course I'm having trouble. Ha! Give another lead here. A lot of the leads, you'll notice, have a little rope. That's just to keep them nice and neat and tidy. And if you go out in the industry, just as a personal tip, do us all a favour. Roll your leads. Makes it easier for the next bloke that's got to unroll them. And half the time it's got to be yourself anyway, so that's helping yourself. Number 3 into number 3. And one more. Being that of number 4 into number 4. Okay, so we've got our 4 leads coming from our 4 lights into the back of our control desk. With a little bit of background music, we will now plug in the lighting desk. Once again, just a normal power lead. Okay, so here we are with our basic 4-pack control desk. All we'll do, I'll just show you how to use these. Most desks will have a power switch. It's the same as any power switch, such as a kettle or a television, just to supply power to the control system. The same as, I would say, 100% of lighting desks, they have a master control called master. All that means is it is the master of all your channels. So when you bring that up, it now has power running through all your channels. Now channels are these here, that is channel 1. Now if you just look up, we've now controlled light number 1. These are channels on your desk, and this is a 4-channel desk. So channels purely mean the faders that correspond with the light and the fader that controls it. Now these are faders. I should explain this before we go any further. When people refer to fader buttons, they are these here. So we bring up channel 1 to full, or when I say full, that is also the same as saying 100%. In lighting they talk in percentages, as far as if you bring it up to 50%, naturally your light is working at half its potential. So just in percentages we talk. We can bring up channel 2 on the desk, and channel 2 comes up, or light number 2 we've called this one. Channel 3 on the desk, and we get light number 3, channel 4, and we've got light number 4. Now I'll just bring all these down now, or just to explain before I go on this master function. If I was to pull this master function down, all the lights will go out, because as I said, this is the grand master of those 4 channels. So if you wanted one scene, for instance, where we wanted all our lights up to come on, you could control it all from here, and up they all come slowly. And if you bring it down slowly, down they all come. By the same token, if you leave the master up and you just want to control them individually, you can bring them down individually, or in groups of 2, just depending on how many faders you're controlling. Okay, so the other thing we can do instead of using the individual faders is what they call flash buttons. They call them flash buttons because, as you'll see when I press this button, the lights flash on and off when you release your finger from the button. These are called flash buttons. In rock and roll shows they're used quite a lot because you can bring up, say, 2 of your faders, let's bring up units 1 and 4, but by using the flash buttons you can control those fairly rapidly. So if we bring those down, we can run them all by flash buttons, which means you've got fast control over the lights. The other thing which a lot of desks have is a chase function. Chase, as I'm sure you'll understand, is a chase. If I press the chase function, you've got a master control over your lights. So we've got the Grand Master up, telling them they want all channels to work at 100%. I've pressed the chase button, which enables the desk to go into chase mode, and by controlling it with this as just a speed control, the speed fader, we can increase the speed of the chase or slow it down. The other thing you can do on these particular desks is press a button called audio, audio being sound of course, which means the desk is now sound activated to control the lighting. If I clap my hands, they run to the sound of my hands clapping, or if I talk loud enough, they will flip with my voice. So that's the control of a 4-pack. We're calling this one a 4-pack. It's the actual brand name of this, or you can call them quad packs rather, or just a 4-channel control desk. So there you have it, the 4-pack, a 4-channel desk with flash buttons, a master fader, a chase function with a chase button and a chase speed control, and an audio slave which runs the chase on audio. So that's your 4-pack or 4-channel lighting desk. Okay, we've just had a look at a 4-pack system with the Jansz 4-pack desk we had a look at there. With that desk there, that runs off a 240 volt supply out of the wall, or a 10 amp supply. We have the 4 PAR 56s in that setup. Off that actual desk, the maximum you can run at any one time is 8 of those PAR 56s. They were a 300 watt lamp in those PAR 56s, and we ran 4 of them. We could have run 8. 300 watts multiplied by 8, because there's 8 PAR 56s you can run, is 2,400 watts. That is the maximum you can run off the 4-pack we just had a look at a moment ago. Now we're going to move up the scale onto a 12-channel system, which runs off a 3-phase supply, or 32 amps per leg. You'll know more about that when you go through your handbooks, and ask your teachers if you're confused. Moving on now, we're going to power up. First of all, we power up the 12-channel system, which is with this here, which is a lead, just like an extension lead you would find at home, except this is a 3-phase extension. It looks larger, but don't be frightened by it. It just means it carries more power. So we look here at the 3-phase supply on the wall, or the 32 amp plug, and we connect up. There's the 5 pins, which in this industry, being that of lighting, 5 pins for the 32 amp supply is the standard we use. We plug it in there. There's the 5 pins in there, which go into the 5 receptacles on the wall, like so. And we just screw that up nice and tight so nobody can undo it or maybe plug their fingers in there where you don't want them to be. Notice the power is turned off, very important. The same as any sort of household safety tip is naturally the same in lighting. If the power's on and it's not plugged into a light, don't touch the end of the lead. So make sure it's turned off. We've got that running through our power lead here, our 3-phase lead, and that runs down to the floor here. This is the end. This is the other end of the extension lead we've just plugged into the wall. Just for today's purposes, we've got it coiled up here because naturally we're not in a real life situation as far as a gig or a concert or a band situation. But normally this extension lead here would run from the power supply on the wall to wherever your dimmer rack is. This is the dimmer rack here. This is actually a 24-channel system, but today we're only going to be showing you how to use a 12-channel system. These actually do come as a 12-channel dimmer rack, but in this setup here for our hire company, we've got this set up as a 24-way system. But as I said, don't let that confuse you. We're only going to be showing you how to operate off one 12-channel dimmer rack. So the first thing we do, we've got our power connected to the wall from our 32 amp extension lead. Now this is the power lead coming out of a dimmer rack. So we're looking at this dimmer rack here on the bottom, the 12 channels. Once again, the 5 pins there. The end of our extension lead we've just powered, or more to the point, plugged in at the wall. So we plug those in together. And once again, we screw that up nice and tight. And as I said before, quite simply, just so people don't, one, try and undo it during a concert, which can be rather annoying to lose your power, but once again, more for safety, so people don't whack their fingers in between it, and once the power's on, that could be dangerous. But we've done it up nice and tight, so that's not a problem. Now, we're moving on here to the dimmer rack. This is a 12-channel dimmer rack. I'll just explain this quickly. We might go into more detail later once we've got the system completely set up. But 12 channels, meaning, we'll call these GPOs, general purpose outlets, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. It goes on to 12. So it's 12 channels, which means these power little sockets here. This here is our control cable inlet here, where we go from the control desk, the 12-channel desk, and there's a lead which we'll show you in a moment called a multi-core, which plugs into here. Up here we have fuses, just the same as are in your house, like if a kettle was to short circuit or someone was to plug a knife into a GPO on the wall, it would blow a fuse. The same on here, if there's a problem with the power or you're running too many lights on a channel, it will blow the fuse. And we have 12 fuses along the top here, which all correspond, one fuse for each channel. Now, we showed you on the 4-pack, and as I just explained, that runs off 240 volts out of the wall, which is 10 amps total. The difference with a 12-channel dimmer rack from the 4-pack is this runs off 3-phase power. Now we won't go into too much detail about how the power splits up once it's inside the dimmer rack. That's not important to the user. The important thing is if you've got enough power, it will all work. But what it does is out of each one of these channels here, or sockets or GPOs, whatever you wish to call them, we call them channels because it corresponds then with the desk. Channel 1 is channel 1 here. So from now on we'll refer to them as channels. So channel 1 here, that can take a maximum load of 10 amps or, as I explained with a 4-pack, 2,400 watts. Now in lighting, because lighting we always use lights, hence the name lighting, if a light is a 1,000 watt light, or 1K, which is an abbreviation of 1,000 watts, 1,000, that is less than half of the potential of this channel. So it can take 2,400 watts. If we use two PAR 64s, which are 1,000 watts each, two PAR 64s, that's 2,000 watts, you can run two off this channel here. It leaves you with 400 watts spare, but of course you only run two PAR cans together, so that's quite safe to plug into channel 1 on here, 2,000 watts, so it won't blow the fuse. What we've got here is the control desk, a 12-channel control desk. It's a very simple one, but a good place to start. A lot of schools use these. Just for your own information, this is called an ACT 12. That's just like a Commodore has a name. This has its own name, and it's made by Strand. So the ACT 12, 12-channel control desk. Out of the back of the desk, we'll explain a bit about the desk in a moment, but just for now, out of the back of the desk comes the multi-core, which is the control cable. That is the cable which carries the signal from the desk to the dimmer racks. Okay, so the desk tells the dimmer racks what to do, and it can't do that without the cable. So it's a control cable. As you'll see here, in the end of the control cable, which we're just having a look at now, are the pins which actually lock into the front of the dimmer rack, which I'll now show you. So the front of the dimmer rack is here, and there is the point that I pointed out before, where the control cable or multi-core plugs into. Just before I plugged it in, I'll just show you. Naturally, for our setup today, I've made things quite simple. The dimmer rack is right beside the control desk. But under normal circumstances, you wouldn't be that fortunate, because when you're running a show, naturally you're going to be behind the crowd or right up the back of a hall or a venue, and the band will be in front of you and most likely quite some distance. In those situations, what you do is this has an extension cord which goes with it, like any extension cord, but it's a multi-core extension cord. So this is what you would normally do. You would plug the control cable out of the desk into the extension lead, and then you would run that into the dimmers. But there's no need to do that today because we're right beside the dimmer rack, which is nice and handy to us. So as I've just said, normally you would need to run an extension with a multi-core, but today we're just going to run straight out of the desk and into the 12-channel dimmer rack. So we plug that into here. Just a point worth noting with lighting equipment, a lot of plugs, exempting the normal channels on the dimmer rack, can be a little difficult to put in at times. And this is just a personal tip, always take your time. If it's one thing that can be a problem when you're plugging things like control cables in on multi-cores, if you're trying to rush, you can bend the pins inside that connector. The same with things like looms, which we'll show you later. One secret always worth knowing is when you're plugging things in, if there's trouble, take your time. It's not an important thing to know as far as setting things up, but it is later on, because it can often be a fault of many operators or technicians to rush their way through. When you're connecting things like that, they are fragile. As strong as they are made, they're still fragile in many ways. Okay, so we've got the multi-core or the control cable running out of our desk and into the dimmer rack. So the power to the desk in this situation, it is an analog desk. We can explain a little bit more about that later, but just for now, note that word, analog desk. And what that means, the analog is a protocol, which I'll have to explain a little bit more later, but it is the language, if you'd like, that the desk is talking to this dimmer rack. And this dimmer rack is an analog 12-channel dimmer rack. So it's the language that it speaks. Okay, so we've got the multi-core plugged in, and now we're ready to set up our light show and plug them in where they're relevant on this, which we'll show you now. Now, as you can see in the background here, we've already set up a bit of a show, which I'll explain now just briefly what we've done. We have in this rig, as I'll call it, you often call it, when you have a group of lights set up, it is called a rig. Okay, we've got the PAR 64s, which you've already seen earlier on, which you're having a look at now.
Down on the floor here we have some par 56s, and up the back there on the stand up there is some prelude, or what we'll call them is profiles, as I explained before. So the profiles are the light with a lamp source and two lenses, which means they are focusable, which I showed you before. Okay, just to explain what we've done here, up the back the profiles are on a stand, which is on a T-piece, which has a short length of bar, and they are suspended by some hook clamps, which we covered before. Now we'll just have a look here. We have our bar of 4 par 64s, which are on a stand. These are put on with a spigot, which is just a short length of pipe which slots in there. You do that up. So our par 56s are on floor stands. Often they're called H stands as well, quite simply because it's a H shape that they make. So they're floor stands or H stands. Now what we've got is we've put the colour frames and the gel in each unit, in each par 64 and the 56s. So the way we do that is naturally we have a sheet of gel or coloured filter which goes in the gel frame. All units, regardless of whether it's a par 64, a par 56 or whatever light it may be, wherever the coloured filter or gel, which we'll now refer to it as it is its name, goes in a gel frame. Regardless of what light it is gel and a gel frame. So we've already put the colour in these other units quite simply by, as I just did, putting the gel in the colour frame, then you slide it into the unit such. Okay, so all our units are coloured. We've on this side here we have some more par 64s. Just to give you an idea of different ways to set them up, what we've done here, different from the other side, which was on a stand with a T-piece and the other one with a spigot. This one here is on a bar, and this is a bar of par 64s, which is suspended by 2 hook clamps on the bar. This is probably the most common way you'll be doing things when you move into the industry, if is your wish, because most venues have a lighting bar, which is usually suspended from the roof. Big shows like at the Tennis Centre or whichever venue you may know in your area, or a large stadium, will have bars provided. If they don't, quite often on bigger productions or even smaller ones, they will set up bars for you. So 9 times out of 10, it's safe enough to say there will be bars somewhere in the venue in which you're going to work. And certainly school venues have quite a lot of lighting bars. All their theatres are fitted with them. So that's our rig as it is today. We've set up our lighting rig. Now the important thing to do is get power from the dimmer rack, from the 12-channel dimmer rack to the lights themselves. Now, a simple way of doing this, you might think, would be to run individual extension cables from each channel to the lights, but there is an easier way of doing it, and in the industry we call them looms. What a loom is simply this cable here, which is, instead of running 8 individual extension leads, in this case, because this loom is an 8-way loom. Now I'll just explain this in detail first. They use the expression 8-way, meaning 8, it's the same as having 8 extension leads. You can have 4-way, 5-way, 8-way looms. This one is an 8-way loom. So out of this, once we connect it up, which I'll now show you, we end up with 8 ends of plugs. So this is an 8-way loom. Now what we've got here is the tail to the loom. Now we have pins in here, and that's with the receptacles for them there. This is just like an extension lead, and we're going to plug them together. So we have this connector here, which goes into this part here. So we plug that in, like so. I can show you a bit more detail how to plug this in at the other end, where it's a bit simpler to see. So we have this loom here, which I'll show you the other end of in a moment, plugs in here. Now what we have, because inside here is the equivalent of having 8 extension leads, it then comes out and it breaks back into single leads, okay, with our sockets on the end. So what we can do now is feed these to the lights. We now choose which lead we're going to run to which light. Now we'll only do a few because it could get a little boring and might take quite some time to do. So what we have here is our sockets. Now in this demonstration here we have the lights going from your left to your right. Just to make it simple for the demonstration, we'll plug number 1, and I'll explain this. Each one of these cables has a number on it, as will 90%, 99, if not all looms will have a number. So this is an 8-way loom. The actual sockets will be labelled number 1, to number 8. So we'll grab number 1, which we now have, and we'll just plug that into these cans here. Now, as I explained before with the PAR 64s, we run 2 of these together because each PAR 64 runs off 110 volts. So we plug the 2 of them together and we obtain 220, which can then run off a 240 volt supply. So we have our end here. This here is the splitter, which runs to the sockets or the leads which come out the back of these two 64s. So there is our splitter, the connector, the end socket coming out of our loom or our head, and we plug those in together. Okay. One more important thing is, still we haven't turned on that 3-phase supply because you don't want power running when you're doing this sort of thing. It's too dangerous. So we've still got no power. Just for now, we're connecting them up and getting a run between the lights, the dimmer rack, to the control desk. So as of yet, we've run no power. Okay, so we've plugged the leads into the lights. We've got number 2 here plugged into this splitter for these 2 cans. Just to explain what I've done, I've plugged nearly all the lights in now. We've actually made this here, these 2 cans here. We're now going to refer to these as cans. All the PAR 64s are cans. You'll hear that terminology used. So these 2 cans are number 1. These 2 cans here I've plugged into number 2 on the loom. The profiles behind me are number 3. These 2 cans here are number 4. Number 5 are those 2 cans there. Then I've plugged over here the PAR 56 on the floor, the can down here, and it just goes in order from there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've also plugged in these 2 PAR 56s, which I'm now going to show you. We're going to plug together, and that's quite easy. We've got this circuit here coming from the header cable, number 7. We plug that into this PAR can here, like so. Now, the distance between these 2 cans is too far for me to plug the lead coming off the back of the can together. So quite simply, you just get an extension lead and plug it in, like so. The extension lead runs across here, and we then plug this PAR can in here. So those 2 will come on together. I've also done the same thing with the profiles on the back bar. I've plugged the 2 of those together. So when we bring up the channel that corresponds to the profiles, that's number 3, both of them will come on together. And that's quite safe to do. That's not overloading the channel. These are 300 watts each. We've only got 2 together. That's 600 watts. And as I said, each channel can cope with 2,400. So there's no problem with blowing a fuse there. The profiles are 650 watts. So 2 of those together, once again, isn't a problem as far as the amount of power into that dimmer channel. Okay, and we've got all the cans plugged in. What we'll do now is we'll move back to the dimmer rack, and we'll show you how we plug the end of the loom that is at the dimmer rack into the dimmers by putting a tail on it and plugging it into the corresponding channels with each of these lights that we've just set up. So we'll move now to the dimmer rack. So we're now back at the 12-channel dimmer rack. We're now just going to refer to this as the rack, okay, because there's no other equipment here that's called a rack, so it's the rack. Now, I've just moved up to the top rack here just to make it easier for me to demonstrate rather than bending down all the time, so don't feel confused. And as I said, it doesn't matter. This is a 12-channel rack, and this is a rack, so it didn't matter which one we went to. So we're now operating out of the top one here. So we've got our loom coming back from the lights. So this loom here corresponds with the other one up the end there with the rest of the lights. So the loom comes back to here. Now, this is the tail we were talking about, which is the other end of the head you saw up the other end. So we now plug these 2 in together. I'll just show you these connectors here. They plug in like so, the same as the others. So we just like so. Once again, it's always a matter of just taking your time when plugging it in. It really can be a hassle sometimes, but you're better off to take your time, because if you damage the pins inside these, that's the little male pins, in these or any of the connectors, you really are stuck on a job. For the sake of taking an extra 5 seconds, it can really save you a lot of trouble. Okay, so we've plugged the loom into the tail. And as you can see, there's our 8 circuits or wires coming back. Now, I've actually taken the trouble of plugging some in. Now, all it's a matter of doing is, as I explained before, these are 8-way looms. So there is 8 power cables, which are numbered 1 to 8. This is channel number 1, so I've plugged number 1 into channel number 1 on the desk. number 2 into number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. We'll now get number 7, and we'll plug that into number 7, and number 8. Now, you'll know what I mean when you come across using a dimmer rack. These ones, in fact, are not labelled on the actual dimmer 1 through to 12. It's actually A, B, C, and D, and they go in groups of 4. So naturally, A would be 1, B would be 2, and so on. We go in natural progression. Okay, so we've now plugged them all in. Now, one thing I want to point out, without going into it too much, is for the purposes of this demonstration, I've actually set them up with number 1 into channel number 1. You don't have to do so. Depending on how you want the show to look, depends on where you plug them in here. Now, like I said, I won't go into it too much, but just for the ease of this purpose, I've actually plugged them in 1 through 8. Now, we could use the other channels here on the dimmer rack, but for this situation, we've only used 8. We've got one 8-way loom, so I've used all 8. But if you wanted to, we could use more lights and run maybe some single extension leads back to lights, or maybe a 4-way or 5-way loom, or even another 8-way loom, and just use 4 of the leads coming out of the 8-way. But there's no need to keep going on. You'll see what I mean with just this demonstration. So now we've got the control desk set up, the multi-core lead running into the dimmer rack. We have power running to the dimmer rack through a 3-phase extension cable. We have the tails from the rack going into a loom, the loom up to the lights, or more to the point, the loom up to the head cable, and from there we have the 8 leads going into the lights that we selected. Now it's time, we've got everything plugged in, there's nothing more to touch, so we can turn the power on from the 3-phase mains coming off the wall. So currently it's in off, we just turn it on, switch it on. We now have power to the dimmer rack, and power is now being supplied to the control desk in this situation through the multi-core. Now we'll look at the actual control desk itself. So we move over here to the 12-channel control desk. Now what we've got here, this desk, as we've said, 12 channels. Now we've got 12 fader buttons, which are numbered 1 through 12. Now, just to explain, because you're probably asking why there's 2 sets of them, number 1 is number 1 at the top, but it also is number 1 down the bottom. This is because this is a 2 preset desk. Preset is simply the top row of faders is 1 preset, and the bottom row is another preset. Now all this means is, now that we've got power running, we can actually bring some lights up. First we'll do that. If I bring up fader number 1 in the top preset, you'll notice up comes the first 2 par cans we plugged in to channel number 1 on the dimmer, and the power naturally being fed from the dimmer to the lights via the loom. So we bring up number 1. Now just to further explain the 2 preset part of the desk first, if I bring up number 1 and number 2, you'll notice in the background you just saw the green lights come up as well. We'll call that for the moment a scene. So we've got 2 lights or 2 groups of lights selected, channels 1 and 2. Now I will bring up another set of cans on the other bottom preset. Let's bring up numbers 5 and number 4, or 4 and 5, whichever way you wish to call it. And now down here you'll notice on the desk, I've brought up those groups of par cans. This white fader here is the master fader, so it's the boss of these 12 faders at the top. The grey fader here on the bottom is the boss, or the master fader, as it's called, for the bottom grey 12 faders. Now, as I explained with the 4-packs, faders work as when you take them up to the top of their position, or whichever they call their full position, you go to 100% of its capacity. So with this white master fader here, when it is at the top, it is telling all of these groups here, if they're up, which 1 and 2 are, they are to be at 100%. Now there's 2 ways we can do things. We've brought up 1 and 2 as a scene. Now I'll just take out these 2 for a moment just to show you something. If I grab that master fader and we look at the lights now, as you're about to see, if I take that master fader down to 50%, you'll notice those lights dim out. I'll just take those up, flash them out a bit for you. So I can control both of those groups of lights, so channels 1 and 2 with the master fader, which is now at 50%. So I'll take that up to full. If you can just look at the desk again for a moment, which we're now going to do, the other way you can do that, which is a harder way of doing it, is taking 1 and 2 down to 50%. So now you see the advantage of having a master fader. In other words, if I bring up all of our channels, all of our lights, as you'll see in the background happening now, we've got all of our lights up. By simply grabbing that one master fader, I can turn off all of those lights and bring them all back on again. So that is why you have a master fader. If I didn't have that master fader, I would have to grab all 12 faders, and bring them all down to 0. Okay, what we'll show you to do now is how to do a crossfade between two scenes, or to make sense of this desk for you, between two presets. So if we look down at the desk, what we'll do is, at the moment in the background, I've got the 4 Parkans on. Now, that is channels 1, 2, 4 and 5. Now, what we've got here is the master faders, as I've just explained before. Now, at the present, the white master fader, which, as I've said, controls these 12 channels here, is at 100%. The grey master fader is also at 100%, which controls the bottom preset. Now, one thing I will explain, which may confuse some of you, a lot of desks are different to this, being that when both faders are down like such, they are both at 0%. And when you take them both up to full, they both are at full, or when you take them to the top, rather. But with this desk, the case is different. When the white fader is at the bottom, it is at 0, and when the grey fader is at the top, it is 0. Now, I'll explain why that is. If we just bring that grey fader down to full, and we look up at the lights for a moment, you'll notice the grey fader we have got as a master fader for channels 4 and 5. So channels 4 and 5 are on, as you can see with the lights. Now, we'll just watch the lights first. If I move these master faders, you'll notice it does a crossfade between the two. Now, if we just look down at the desk, I'll explain why this desk is designed like this. It simply means, as we look down at these faders down here, if I grab the 2 faders and bring them down together, they change as I just showed you before. The difference is, we'll now move on to the faders here, and I'll show you how hard it can be if you don't have them together. If we have the white master fader to the top, and the grey master fader was at 0, as in some other desks, as opposed to this one, which is at the current is at full, it would mean if this on other desk was 0 and the other one was full, to do a crossfade, you would have to move both together. Or as some operators do, they use a thumb and a finger and they cross them. But with this desk, it makes it easier because by grabbing both together, you're taking 1 to full and 1 to 0. And we'll just do that again. I'll take them both down. You'll notice channels 4 and 5 come up because the grey fader, which is the bottom preset, is now down at full, and the white fader has now gone to 0. So, just to recap, we have our desk here with our 12 faders at the top preset, so I can control all 12 channels from here, which you'll notice the light above me here coming on and off. We can bring up the 8 channels which we've actually got plugged in out of the 12. I can also do the same at the bottom, and naturally I can set up some scenes and crossfade them by moving the master faders. So naturally there is many things you can do with the desk and many ways you can design a show or operate the show, but that basically is how to run a 12-channel system. So that ends this part of the explanation, so to speak. So good luck with everything so far. Don't be afraid to experiment.
If you would like to find out more about lighting systems or any other aspect of the music industry, contact the Oz Music office in your state or territory, or phone the Basic Music Industry Skills Hotline toll-free on 1-800 64 37 38.